The year is 1463, and in the frozen mountains of Thessaly, a single candle flickers against the wind. Outside, snow drifts through the air like falling ash, coating the stones of the convent of Kallipetra in silence. Inside, 21 women kneel before a crude wooden altar, their faces carved in gold, light, and shadow. They do not speak, they do not move. The candle burns low, trembling, as if it understands what they do not dare to say, that when this light dies, so will everything they have ever known. This is not a story about death. It is a story about what refuses to die. For 10 years, since the fall of Constantinople, the Sisters of Kallipetra have lived in hiding, preserving the old prayers, the old language, the old faith that the new empire has forbidden. Every dawn, they light a candle made from olive oil, and the last wax salvaged from the ruins of Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral where God once echoed, and now only silence reigns. Sister Aristea, the abbess, carries the same flame that burned during the final mass before the city fell. She was there when the cross was torn from the altar, and the marble floors ran with blood. She carried that small light in her hands as she fled through burning streets, and she swore that it would never go out as long as she lived. Now, a decade later, the same flame burns before her again, smaller, weaker, but alive. The sisters call it the Heart of Sophia. To the empire, it is blasphemy. To them, it is memory. The wind outside howls like a living thing. From the valley below, faint red light rises against the snow, the reflection of distant torches, hundreds of them, moving like a river of fire. Aristea watches through the cracked window, her fingers tightening around the rosary. She knows what those torches mean. They have come not to kill, but to erase. The empire has no need for martyrs anymore. Martyrs are remembered. It needs silence. It needs absence. The Ottoman decree calls it conversion. Aristea calls it extinction. The youngest of the sisters, Helena, only 19, kneels beside her, whispering a prayer in Greek that no one beyond these walls remembers how to speak. Her voice is trembling. She was a child when her family was taken. She has never seen war, only the aftermath of forgetting. Aristea touches her shoulder and whispers, "When they come, you will not hide your face. You will not beg. We are the voice of what they cannot kill." Helena nods, though she does not understand. None of them truly do. In the courtyard, the last snow of winter falls over the herbs they've grown for healing, lavender, sage, and rosemary, frozen in the ground. The bell that once called them to prayer lies shattered from an old storm, its fragments half buried beneath the frost. Even the sound of faith has been silenced here, but still, every dawn they sing. They sing in whispers, in breaths, in hums that barely reach the stone ceiling. It is not defiance, it is remembrance. Aristea kneels again before the candle. The flame wavers, stretching toward her like a voice too faint to hear. She cups her hands around it, protecting it from the cold. She remembers what her mentor once told her, long before the city fell. Empires end the moment their people forget how to weep. She closes her eyes. The candle's light dances against her skin like the pulse of a dying world. Beyond the walls, the red glow of the torches grows brighter. Hooves strike the frozen earth. A new dawn rises, but it brings no sun, only soldiers. In that final moment before the gates shatter, Sister Aristea lifts the candle high, her voice calm and clear. "If the world forgets us, let it remember this." And as the doors crash open, 21 women rise together, their shadows bending toward the same light, singing a hymn that no empire will ever translate. Snow fell through the broken roof of the chapel, melting into the cracks between the stones as 21 women stood in silence. The soldiers entered without shouting, without chaos, their boots echoing like a ritual rather than a raid. They carried no torches now, only scrolls, ink, and the seal of the Sultan. Behind them, a single officer watched, tall, still, his armour polished but his face unreadable. His name was Hassan al-Rumi, a man born of both worlds, Greek blood, Ottoman rank. He knew the mountains, the language, the prayers. That was why they sent him, to unmake what he once was. He opened the decree and read aloud in Turkish, his voice steady and ceremonial. By order of His Majesty Sultan Mehmed II, all inhabitants of the conquered lands must submit to the authority of the Sublime State. Those who accept the truth of Islam shall be granted protection. Those who refuse will be judged as rebels and delivered into silence. The words hung in the cold air. Aristea stepped forward. Her hands were bare, her face pale, her eyes brighter than the candle she still held. She spoke not to Hassan, but to the soldiers behind him, in Greek so clear it pierced the stillness. "We already belong to a king," she said, "and he does not reign from your throne." The youngest sisters flinched, expecting the sword, but none came. Hassan did not shout. He only watched her, his expression not anger but something heavier recognition. For a moment, it seemed he would answer her in the same language, but he turned away instead and gave the smallest nod. The soldiers stepped back, closing the doors. That night, the sisters were locked inside their own chapel. No food, no water, only the echo of the storm and the creak of the wooden beams above. Outside, the soldiers made camp. They laughed, ate, and sang around fires that burned brighter than the candle within. Inside, the flames still flickered, trembling against the draught that crept through the stone. Helena began to cry quietly, her breath fogging in the cold air. Sister Lydia took her hand and whispered, "They want us to fear the dark. Don't let them hear you." Hours passed. The candle burned low, the smell of wax mixed with damp and ash. Then, from the back of the chapel, a voice began to hum low, cracked but steady. It was Kallipetra, the oldest of them, blind for years, but still remembering every note of the ancient hymns. One by one, the others joined. No one had given the order. It was instinct. A sound born from centuries of silence. The melody wound through the air like smoke. Outside, one of the guards stopped eating, his head tilting toward the sound that slipped through the cracks of the wooden door. Aristea stood and sang the final verse alone, her voice breaking and rebuilding in the same breath. When she finished, she looked at the candle. Its light was thin, almost invisible, but still alive. "They will not burn us," she said softly. "They will let us fade. That is their mercy." She touched the flame with her fingertip, feeling the sting. "Then let us fade as fire does, leaving warmth long after it dies." At dawn, the doors opened. Hassan al-Rumi entered alone. He carried a tray of bread and water. He set it on the floor, saying nothing. Aristea watched him. "Your kindness has a purpose," she said. "So does ours." Hassan met her eyes for the first time. "Faith cannot feed you," he said quietly. "It can," she answered, "but not the body." He turned away, closing the doors again. The sisters did not touch the food. The candle still burned. And somewhere outside, among the tents of the empire, the officer wrote a single line in his journal before dawn. "They are not waiting for rescue. They are waiting to be remembered." The third day came without sunrise. A thick mist rolled down from the mountains, swallowing the convent in grey light. Inside the chapel, the air was heavy with wax and breath, and the flame of the last candle danced as though caught between staying and vanishing. The sisters had not eaten since the soldiers came. Their lips were cracked, their voices hoarse, but they prayed not for deliverance, but for clarity. Sister Helena's hands trembled as she tried to trace the shape of a cross in the air. Beside her, Sister Lydia whispered words not from scripture but from memory, her mother's lullaby, turned into prayer. When the door opened again, it was not Hassan this time. A servant entered, young and silent, carrying a pitcher of water and a bowl of bread. He set them down on the floor and turned to leave. Helena's eyes followed him with desperation. "Please," she whispered, "where are they taking us?" The man did not answer. He paused at the threshold, then looked down, just for a heartbeat, and murmured something in Greek so faint it was almost lost. "To the coast." Then he was gone. Aristea knelt by the bread and the water. The others stared at her, waiting. Kallipetra, the elder, broke the silence first. "They want us to take it," she said. "They want us to thank them for it. That's how the forgetting begins." Aristea nodded slowly. "Then we will not eat." She took the bread in her hands and placed it beside the candle. "If hunger is the price of memory, then let hunger make us remember." By nightfall, 2 of the younger sisters fainted. Lydia tore her own robe to make cloths for their heads. Aristea said nothing. She sat before the candle, her face calm, her eyes reflecting the flame, until it seemed as if light itself lived inside her. Helena crawled closer, her voice breaking. "Mother, why does God stay silent?" Aristea looked at her and smiled with a kind of peace that frightened the others. "He isn't silent," she said. "We are. The world made us whisper so long we forgot how to listen back." Outside, the soldiers grew restless. Hassan sat apart from them, his ink pot beside him, writing by firelight. His men drank and cursed the cold. One of them asked, "Why not just kill them?" Hassan didn't look up. "Because dead women don't make examples," he said. "Living ones do." Inside the chapel, Helena began to hum again, barely a sound, a tremor of voice in the dark. The others joined her, weakly at first, then stronger, their harmony rising with each breath. The candlelight flickered in rhythm with the song, casting shadows that moved like souls on the walls. They sang until the last note faded into the silence. Then Aristea whispered, "Even if they chain our hands, our breath still belongs to us." On the 4th morning, the doors opened wide. Hassan entered once more, flanked by 2 soldiers. His voice was cold now, stripped of the quiet mercy he had shown before. "You will leave at dawn tomorrow. You will walk to the coast. Those who cannot walk will not be carried." Aristea rose slowly, her face pale but steady. "Then we walk," she said. Hassan hesitated, perhaps expecting pleading or tears. There were none. He looked around the room at the candle still burning, impossibly, after days without oil. "How does it still live?" he asked softly, almost to himself. Aristea's answer was simple. "Because we do." That night, the sisters prepared for the journey. They wrapped themselves in linen veils, kissed the stone floor, and touched the wall where the candlelight had stained the rock black. Helena leaned close to the flame. "If we never return," she whispered, "burn for us." At the edge of sleep, Aristea heard the wind outside shift. It carried no sound of war now, only the slow, patient breath of the mountains. For the first time since the city fell, she felt something like peace. When dawn came, they stepped out into the cold. 21 women, walking in silence, hands bound, the candle extinguished behind them. But in the smoke curling from the wick, a faint glow lingered like a heartbeat, refusing to stop. Snow turned to rain as the sisters descended the narrow mountain path, their sandals slipping on the wet stones. The soldiers did not hurry them. The road itself was punishment enough. They walked in silence, bound together by ropes and fatigue. By the 2nd day, blisters opened on their feet, and blood mixed with mud. The youngest, Helena, stumbled often. Each time, Aristea lifted her by the arm without a word. The older nun, Kallipetra, moved with strange calmness, as if every step were a prayer. The soldiers called them ghosts, not from cruelty, but because that is what they looked like, figures already half gone, moving between worlds. At night they were herded into barns or under ruined arches. The soldiers slept by fires, the women huddled together in darkness. Rain leaked through the roof and soaked their veils. They whispered psalms between shivers. On the 3rd night, one of the younger sisters, barely 20, asked if God could still see them now that the candle had gone out. Aristea touched her forehead gently. "He sees through us," she said. "We are his flame now." By dawn of the 4th day, the group reached the plain below the mountains. The ruins of villages stretched on both sides, burned doors, broken wells, smoke rising from what had once been homes. Helena paused to look at a tree split by lightning. "Do you think it hurts to break like that?" she asked softly. "Only the first time," Lydia answered, pulling her onward. On the 5th day, Kallipetra collapsed. The soldiers shouted for them to leave her, but Aristea knelt beside the old woman. "You've walked far enough," she whispered. Kallipetra smiled faintly, her lips cracked. "I will meet you where the light begins again." They buried her in the dust, marking the grave with 3 small stones. No one cried. There were no tears left to spend. That evening, as they camped near the river, Hassan sat alone, staring into the water. The reflection of the nuns shimmered behind him, 20 shapes bent in prayer. He felt something unfamiliar twist inside his chest, an ache that had no name. He took his quill and wrote on the edge of his orders. "They walk as if the earth itself remembers them." Then he tore the page and threw it into the river. By the 7th day, only 16 women remained. Their bodies were broken, but their silence had changed. It was no longer fear, it was unity, a language beyond words. Even the soldiers stopped mocking them. There was a kind of reverence in the air, unspoken and uneasy. When the caravan finally reached the port of Volos, the sea spread before them grey, endless, merciless. The smell of salt filled their lungs. The sisters stared at it with a mixture of awe and dread. None of them had ever seen the ocean. "So much water," Helena murmured, "and yet we thirst." Aristea said nothing. She looked at the horizon, where the clouds met the waves, and thought of the candle still burning in her mind. They were loaded onto a galley bound for Constantinople. Iron rings closed around their wrists, chaining them to wooden benches. The hold smelled of sweat, tar, and despair. When the ship moved, it groaned like a wounded animal. The sisters prayed, not for freedom, but for endurance. At night, when the sea calmed, Helena began to hum. It was not the hymn of the convent, but something older, a melody her mother used to sing. The others followed, their voices weaving into the rhythm of the waves. Even the oarsmen paused to listen. For a brief moment, the boundaries between prisoner and guard dissolved. Only sound existed, soft, fragile, defiant. One of the soldiers whispered to another, "They're not human." The other replied, "No, they're what's left when humanity refuses to break." As dawn bled into the horizon, the ship passed through waters where the sky seemed to burn with gold. The sisters looked toward it, and Aristea whispered, "If the world must forget us, then let it forget everything but our song." No empire heard them, but the sea did. It carried their voices toward the city of conquerors like a quiet promise that even in chains, light still travels farther than darkness ever will. The sea turned black on the 8th night, swallowing sky and water into one endless shadow. The ship creaked under the weight of wind and chains, its hull groaning like a prayer half-spoken. Rain lashed through the oar-holes, soaking the sisters where they sat shackled to the benches. They could not move, could not sleep. They only whispered to one another in the dark, their breath mingling with salt and fear. Aristea sat at the centre, her wrists raw and bleeding where the iron rubbed against skin. Helena leaned against her shoulder, shivering. "Mother," she whispered, "will they kill us?" Aristea's eyes stayed closed. "No," she said softly. "They will try to unmake us. That is worse." On the 10th day, the storm broke. The galley slid into the still waters of the Bosphorus. The sisters saw the city rise before them, vast and glimmering, its domes like moons caught in fog. Constantinople, their holy city, reborn under another name. To the empire, it was Istanbul, the crown of conquest. To them, it was the wound that never healed. The soldiers straightened, their armour polished, their faces set in pride. The nuns only stared. Aristea felt the air thicken as the ship glided past the towers. "It's beautiful," Helena whispered, tears in her voice. "Yes," Aristea said, "that's what makes it cruel." They disembarked at dawn. Chains rattled, sandaled, feet met stone. Crowds watched from the harbour, merchants, children, slaves. Whispers followed them like wind. Some spat, some crossed themselves, some just stared in silence. The sisters were led through narrow streets lined with markets and fountains, through courtyards where the smell of cinnamon and smoke mixed with the iron scent of empire. They passed beneath the shadow of Hagia Sophia, once the holiest cathedral of Christendom, now a mosque of the sultans. The call to prayer echoed from its minarets, smooth and resonant. The sisters stopped walking. For a moment, all 20 of them knelt, not in rebellion, but in mourning. A soldier moved to strike them. Hassan raised his hand. "Let them," he said quietly. His men hesitated, uncertain whether his mercy was weakness or something else. The women prayed, their voices lost in the echoes of the muezzin. When they stood again, Aristea's face was wet, but not with fear. "We are home," she said, "but it is no longer ours." They were led through the palace gates, past marble courtyards, gilded fountains, tiled walls that glittered like frozen stars. But they did not see the beauty. They saw only what had been taken to build it: stone from their churches, bells melted into lamps, crosses ground into dust. Beneath the grandeur lay the bones of their world. The palace guards led them down a spiral staircase carved into the bedrock, deeper and deeper, until the air grew cold and damp. The torches flickered on walls, slick with condensation. Somewhere below, water dripped steadily, counting seconds that no one would remember. At the end of the passage, an iron door waited. It opened with a moan. The sisters were pushed inside one room, low ceiling, no windows, no light but what seeped under the threshold. When the door shut, the sound was final. Helena reached for Aristea's hand in the dark. "Is this where it ends?" she asked. "No," Aristea whispered. "This is where it begins to be remembered." Days passed without measure. They worked above the ground, scrubbing floors, washing linens, carrying water to halls where the voices of nobles echoed. They were forbidden to speak their tongue, forbidden to pray. Yet at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in the dark cell and whispered the words they were told to forget. At first, they prayed aloud. Later, when the guards began to listen, they prayed in breath alone. The rhythm of their lungs became the rhythm of devotion. One night, Helena found a shard of pottery by the drain. She began to scratch lines into the wall. Tiny crosses, uneven, hurried. The others joined her, carving not just symbols but names, fragments of verses, the memory of their lost convent. Stone became scripture, pain became ink. Over weeks, the walls filled with markings, an alphabet of resistance written in silence. Aristea carved the last words of her teacher: "Light remains." When Hassan inspected the lower corridors weeks later, he noticed the smell of wax. He followed it to the sealed chamber. Inside, the women froze. In the center of the floor, a single flame burned, fashioned from stolen wax, and a rag twisted into a wick. It should not have burned at all. The air was too damp, yet it did. Hassan stood for a long time, staring. "Why?" he asked finally. Aristea looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Because something must remember us." He said nothing more. He turned and left. That night, the sisters prayed beside their small, forbidden light. The flame flickered, fragile but steady, reflecting in their eyes like constellations. For the first time since the mountains, they smiled. They were no longer waiting for rescue. They had become their own proof. Above them, the palace glittered with power. Below, in the dark, 20 women carved eternity into stone. Years passed without anyone counting them. Seasons changed above, but beneath the palace, time moved differently, slow, circular, without light. The Sisters of Kallipetra became ghosts who worked by day and prayed by night. They were assigned to scrub marble halls, polish bronze lamps, and wash the silks of women who never spoke their names. To the empire, they were property. To themselves, they were witnesses. The guards stopped watching them closely. Obedience, after all, looks a lot like silence. In the darkness below, they built a chapel out of nothing. Helena gathered scraps of linen from the laundry to make an altar cloth. Lydia stole candle stubs from the upper kitchens, melting them into small cups fashioned from broken bowls. Aristea used the edge of a nail to carve crosses into the stone, one for each sister still alive. The walls filled slowly, unevenly, some crosses deep and sharp, others faint, unfinished. When their hands bled, they pressed their palms against the marks, leaving stains that dried black like ink. They prayed without words now. They had prayed so long that sound itself seemed unnecessary. Their rhythm was the rhythm of breathing, their psalms the hush between heartbeats. When the palace above filled with the call to prayer, they bowed their heads, not in imitation but in respect for a world that had forgotten them. Aristea said once, in the softest whisper, "They speak to the same sky. We answer from beneath it." One winter night, while fetching water from the underground cistern, Helena found something glimmering in the mud, a shard of glass from an old mirror, cracked and dull but still catching light. She brought it back to their chapel and placed it in the wall. When the candle burned, the reflection scattered the flame into 1,000 fragments. The sisters stared, their eyes wide, as the light multiplied, crawling across the stone like living gold. Aristea smiled. "Now we have a choir," she said. "Every light sings." Word of strange music began to spread among the servants. Some swore they heard hymns in Latin echoing from the floor at night. Others claimed they saw shadows moving where no torches burned. The guards laughed and called it superstition. Yet Hassan, now older and quieter, began to walk the lower halls more often. One night, he stopped outside their door and listened. He could not understand the words, but something in the melody made him close his eyes. For the first time in years, he remembered his mother's voice, a woman who had once prayed in Greek before the empire changed her name. In the years that followed, one by one, the sisters disappeared. Some were taken to other chambers. Some simply stopped waking. Each time, the survivors carved another cross into the wall. Helena, now older, took Aristea's place after the abbess could no longer stand. The flame still burned, though no one knew how. The wax ran out long ago. They began to mix oil from the lamps they cleaned upstairs, hiding small droplets in their sleeves, feeding the fire a single drop each night. It was enough. One evening, Helena pressed her ear to the stone and heard footsteps beyond the wall. Not guards, not servants, something hollow, rhythmic, familiar, the sound of water and tools. She whispered to Lydia, "They're digging." Lydia shook her head. "Then the world is coming back for us." When the wall finally broke centuries later, it wasn't soldiers who entered, but archaeologists. In 2011, during restoration work beneath the Topkapi Palace, workers uncovered a sealed chamber coated in soot. On every surface, crosses, letters, fragments of Greek. And in the centre of the floor, a small blackened circle where something once burned. The scientists called it the Emberlite Cellar. They found no bodies, no relics, only traces of wax and oil older than the empire itself. One of the researchers noticed a phrase carved deeper than the rest, almost invisible. Phi Hos Eniu, Sigma Kappa, Otau Epsilon, Iota, Kappa Alpha He, Epsilon, Iota. The light burns in darkness. Beneath it, a single name, Helena. When they shone ultraviolet light across the wall, the carvings glowed faintly, the soot reflecting like stars. No one could explain why. Perhaps it was the mineral content, or perhaps it was memory itself refusing to fade. In that silent underground chapel, untouched for 500 years, the archaeologists realized something that history had forgotten. The empire had erased everything, names, books, cities, but not this room. The light had kept its promise. It still burned, even when no one was left to tend it. When the chamber was opened, light touched its walls for the first time in half a millennium. Dust rose like smoke, curling through the air, as if the past itself were trying to breathe again. The archaeologists stood in silence. their flashlights trembling across carvings that looked more like wounds than art. There were hundreds tiny crosses, etched so deep the stone had cracked around them, and among them a single phrase carved over and over: Fius mu nu epsilon iota. The light remains. The team recorded everything, but the air inside the chapel felt heavy, sacred, unwilling to be catalogued. One of the researchers, a woman from Thessaloniki named Daria, found herself crying without knowing why. "It's just scratches," her colleague said. But Daria shook her head. "No," she whispered, "it's a heartbeat." Later that night, when the lights were turned off for preservation, one worker swore he saw the faint shimmer of a flame hovering above the blackened floor. No one believed him. They said it was the camera light reflecting off dust. But he returned alone the next evening, stood in the darkness, and listened. Somewhere beyond the stone, he thought he heard singing soft, distant, like voices underwater. News of the discovery spread quickly. Historians wrote papers, theologians debated miracles, journalists called it the convent that time forgot. But beyond all the noise, the truth was simple. The empire that had once silenced those women was gone. Its banners rotted, its palaces turned to museums, its sultans remembered only as names in textbooks. Yet the marks those sisters left behind still spoke. No one could explain why the carvings glowed under light, or how the wax samples from the floor contained traces of herbs used only in 15th century monasteries. But the people who saw it didn't need explanations. They understood instinctively what the empire never could, that faith is not about belief, but endurance. The archaeologists restored the chamber carefully, sealing it with glass so visitors could look inside without disturbing it. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery, a small vigil is held there. No speeches, no sermons, only silence and a single candle lit in the center of the floor. The flame burns for 1 hour, then is extinguished, leaving the room in total darkness again. Yet somehow, the faint glow lingers, as if the stone remembers the light. Above, the tourists walk the polished halls of Topkapi Palace, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. Children laugh, cameras click, history feels distant and safe. But below them, in that chamber of soot and prayer, the air hums with something eternal, because the story of the Sisters of Kallipetra was never about conquest or martyrdom. It was about the quiet defiance of those who refused to vanish. They were never warriors. They never lifted a sword. They simply chose to keep a candle burning when the world demanded darkness. Empires fall, languages die, stones crumble. But somewhere, under all that ruin, light still endures, fragile, patient, alive. In the end, that is the lesson the sisters carved into the walls with their blood and breath. You cannot kill what remembers. The narrator's voice would close the story softly, the way a candle closes a night. They thought silence would erase them, but silence only made them eternal. Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome.